Hello and welcome to a rather impromptu episode of the Welsh Rugby Podcast. I'm Ben James. I'm joined as ever by Stefan Thomas. If you're listening to this, you probably have already heard one podcast from us this week, but we've got a second one because we've got a special guest. Welsh Rugby Union Chief Executive Abi Tierney joins us on today's podcast. Abi, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm okay. Thanks for inviting me along, and it's lovely to see you both, Ben and Steph. Thank you.
Well, no, we appreciate you coming on the podcast. I guess we'll start with the obvious question to begin with. Just a few days removed now from the end of the Six Nations. What are your reflections on the tournament as a whole?
I mean, I think everybody in Wales at the moment is reflecting on the tournament as a whole. I think it was, the first couple of games were really tough, and then losing, Warren halfway through the tournament, that was a real challenge. We got Matt came in, and just, I just want to say a massive thank you to Matt and all the players and the coaching team for picking it up. I think we saw some real promise and built some hope back in the Ireland game, and also some real grit in the Scotland game, and then the devastating result on Saturday, I think, has left us all flawed, and it was devastating to see that at home in the Principality Stadium. So really difficult, massive ups and downs throughout the tournament.
And obviously we're recording this now on Wednesday. The game was on Saturday. There has perhaps been some criticism in some quarters about maybe the hierarchy of the union not fronting up soon. I know it's something that you've been asked about in the past. I think you were asked after the autumn, maybe at the AGM or maybe around that time. And, you said previously you don't necessarily, if you start turning up to press conferences, then it looks like something is, you're almost putting more pressure on the coach. But I just want to know what your thoughts were on those criticisms and perhaps why you haven't said anything as yet.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and you always reflect, on hindsight, should I have done something different on Saturday night? I think particularly when I saw the criticisms that people had felt we'd let Matt hang out and dry, it was my immediate feeling on that was on a human level, and I contacted Matt and said, I really hope that isn't what you felt, and he absolutely said, absolutely not. His job as coach is to front up after the match. That's the purpose of that press conference, and he wanted the opportunity to do that, and that was what we had agreed, and that was standard protocol. In hindsight, should I have been there with him, would that have shown greater support? And it wasn't a decision to shy away from it, Ben, as much as we were following the process that had been agreed pre-match. So I think on a human level, the fact that Matt didn't feel that, I think that was the most important thing for me. And now we're talking today. We had a long chat yesterday, Steph, where I'm not shying away from this. And I think actually being able to talk a few days after the game, when we've all had a chance to reflect, will potentially make it a more, hopefully, useful and considered conversation. And, and happy to take the tough questions as part of that.
Yeah, I suppose any Welsh rugby fan listening to this, the first question they're going to ask is, how do we get Welsh rugby back on track so that we don't suffer a humiliating defeat like we did on Saturday again?
That's a really important question, and one that I've been focusing on for the last year. We've talked a lot before about what I found when I came in and how many areas need rebuilding and starting again almost, and that's going to take time. But one thing I can absolutely assure everybody is we're doing that in a really detailed and in a way that will make it sustainable. I think there was somebody said to me the other day, and it was a really interesting reflection from my perspective, is how bad a situation is when the drop off from previous performance is so dramatic. Because actually, if the drop off was more gradual and the curve wasn't so steep, then that actually indicates that the problems aren't as systemic. It's just part of the natural cycle that we all face in sport. The fact that the actual problems are so stark and the drop off was so steep just shows actually every step in the pathways, whether that's the grassroots game, the senior pathways, and the professional game and then the national team, there's things that need fixing. We could try and do some quick fixes. There aren't any. If there were some, I'd have tried to find them and put them in place. So, the strategy is all about rebuilding at every single point of that and rebuilding for a sustainable future. We will always have volatility in sport, particularly in a smaller nation. But if we can actually make sure that, those curves are less steep in the future, then that's my aim.
Yeah, you and I have discussed this topic previously, but there are a lot of people, I'll be honest, myself included, who think that we probably need to go down to 3 teams,
yes,
for financial reasons, and to concentrate talent. We all heard Sam Warburton's comments on the weekend, and I think Jonathan Foxy Davis has said similar a couple of months back. We're sticking with 4. But what do you say to that sort of argument that 3 is going to make us more competitive, and how can we ensure that, we have 4 teams that don't just survive, but can potentially thrive in the future?
Yes, I think there's 2 main reasons that determine how many teams you have. One is the number and quality of players that you've got to go into those teams, and that do you have a sufficient population to serve 4 teams and serve them well. The second is, do you have sufficient funding to fund all 4 teams at a level for them to be able to compete? And so if you look at both of those and take them both in terms, the first one is we are transforming the WRU to create sufficient funding in order to fund all 4 teams at a level that will allow them to compete and we've made that really clear in the strategy in the playoffs of the tournament that they're in. So the funding is there. So that isn't a reason to go down to 3 teams. Are there sufficient players? The changes and the improvements that we're doing in our pathways will mean that there are sufficient high quality players to do it. So they're the 2 main drivers. And the other thing that people say is, go down to 3 teams, redistribute the money. So in the conversation we've had, Steph, is on the current deal, if we went down to 3 teams, the challenge we'd have is twofold. One is it would take a lot of time and a lot of energy to do that, whereas I actually think we're better off focusing that energy on rebuilding for the future rather than getting into arguments and debates about which team goes, because that means one team has to go. So, where do we want to focus our energy right now? But also, that money wouldn't get redistributed overnight. There's 2 years' notice for a team, whereas the money that we're putting in starts from the 1st of July this year, so that's much, much quicker. Second, and this is really important, is the money, yes, that you take away from a 4th team would get redistributed, but so would the debt, and so would the current PRA, which includes clawbacks if there isn't delivery on the plan. And so actually the 3 teams would not be any better off than they are now. On the new PRA, they're going to get increased and fixed funding, and we're improving the pathways. Now, and I've had this conversation with all 4 regions. We are all united and committed to delivering the 4-team structure, but the new PRA is far more collaborative and also has far more kind of performance mechanisms in it to monitor and track, are we actually delivering what we need to deliver to have a successful system for rugby in Wales? And if we aren't, we'll have the data and analysis to be able to back up the decision on whether the 4-team structure is the right one or whether we need to move to an alternative in the future. So, it isn't ruling it out forever. It's actually saying, look, we have sufficient funding to make it work now. Let's make it work. You talk to some other countries, they're desperate to have more teams, to have more players to pick from. So let's do it this way. It'll be quicker. The funding lands from the 1st of July. If we were to stick on the current PRA, move to 3 teams, it would be at least 2 years away before that money would be redistributed, and it would be redistributed along with the debt. This is a much quicker way to recover.
Do you think the new PRA will allow, and I know it's not all down to the WRU, the individual clubs have got to work hard as well, but do you think the new PRA will allow at least 1, maybe 2 Welsh teams to compete, semi-finals of Champions Cup, trying to win the URC? Do you think it can deliver that?
That absolutely will. And because what the funding will do, the funding will enable us to secure more players, which will give us greater depths, bigger squads. It will enable us to invest in stronger coaching teams and all of the kind of the S&C and everything that goes with that. They'll be able to invest in new facilities. So it's all the things that we know and that we've looked at when we've benchmarked against the teams that are in the top level and performing in playoffs in the URC. It will allow us to compete with them. So, and the funding will start from the 1st of July. It will take time to then build up those squads and improve the facilities, but it will get us to where we need to be, which is really exciting, isn't it? To think about that, in a few years' time, that we'll all be cheering one of those teams in a playoff, and that's where we're aiming to get to.
Yeah, just let's hope.
With the funding, will it be level across the board? I know Gareth Davis, the former Welsh Rugby Union chair, yesterday was talking about, certainly when he was in the union, and obviously COVID hit that when he left in 2020, he was looking to bring in a tiered system.
Yes.
And I think he was pointing that to sort of be the future again, but that's not the case, is it?
No, it is fixed and equal funding in the PRA. There are some elements where there are some incentives in there. So around particularly number of players in the academy and then into the national team, so that rewarding success. But those overall incentives are, and some other flexible funding is only about 10% of the overall PRA. So and that's additional. So the funding will be fixed, but it's similar to the argument around 4 or 3. We'd have spent a lot of time, we'd have had to have negotiated the deal in a very different way to go to a flexible funding model. Doesn't mean that based on the analysis we do and that where we go in the future, that this will be the model forever, but we're committed to 4 teams and shared funding for the, because we believe it is absolutely the best way of making it work and the best place to focus right now in terms of recovery.
Obviously, I suppose you'd hope that the next appointment would be the director of rugby. Where are you with that?
So we've got interviews taking place. We had interviews last week. We've got final interviews this week. So really hoping that we'll be able to announce very, very shortly.
Yeah. In terms of a head coach, obviously Wales is, we're not in a good place at the moment. Hopefully, with the plans you're putting in place, that will change. But it's going to be a tough job, isn't it, for whoever comes in? Are you confident that you can attract a world-class head coach, and also is the money there to do that? And potentially you might have to buy someone out of an existing contract.
Yeah, so it won't surprise you that as well as kind of recruiting for the director of rugby, we've been having kind of tentative conversations with potential head coaches. The interest is absolutely there. The availability is absolutely there. And we've ensured that we've got sufficient funding to cover that post. So I'm really excited. I want to get the director of rugby because it's really important that the director of rugby can input into the process. Then we'll be able to choose the head coach and we will have a strong field to choose from.
Obviously, one of the things you're looking for in a head coach, you mentioned it at Matt Sherratt's first press conference, is, I guess, an improved relationship between the national team and the 4 professional clubs. How important is it having that with the head coach? And also how, you mentioned it again in the past, the relationship between the union and the 4 professional clubs. Where do you feel that relationship is at the minute?
So let me come to the, I'll do the last one and then I'll come to the relationship between the head coach, because I think it's also the relationship with the director of rugby as well. So I think it is better than it's been for a very long time between the union and the regions. I mean, I find the 4 chief executives hugely supportive on both a personal and a professional level. They're the first people I go to when I'm trying to, talk, fix things, sort things. We do it collaboratively. And I think there's a real sense of, purpose of, let's get the PRA over the line. They're going through their governance processes at the moment. And then real, excitement about what that's going to be able to deliver for us. So relationships are good. I think, and I think if they were listening, hopefully they will listen. I just want to thank them. They have been incredibly supportive of the union over the last year when it's been incredibly challenging. I think there's still work to do. I think that those relationships have not been very good for a long time. So I recognise that real trust and sense of working together towards one goal doesn't just happen overnight, and you have to prove yourself over and over again really to rebuild that, but we're doing it together, and I think certainly in a good place and in a much better place actually than a lot of our competitors, and I think that will be a unique advantage for us going forward, because it should allow us, and we had that bit of conversation, didn't we, recently, Steph? I think one of the challenges we've had in the past is being able to make decisions in the interest of Welsh rugby in an agile way and in a constructive and positive way. Well, those relationships will now enable us to do that. So that's answer to the first one. Second one, it's absolutely vital, and it's been a really important part of the interview process, Ben, in terms of looking for someone, both in the director of rugby and the head coach, who cares about the whole system. Not, so isn't there to purely focus on the national squad, but realises actually that the national team can only be successful if the regions are successful, and also if we have a thriving community game. So some of the questions we've been probing in the interview is, how do you see the role of director of rugby interacting and working with the regions and also with the community game? And we've got representatives from both of those areas actually on the interview panel. So we've got a representative from one of the regions and a representative from the community game, as well as a player representative as well. So we're making sure that we're testing all of that through the process. And that's not just about having nice conversations, is it? It's also about having the difficult conversations when they need to be had. So, and how you manage potential conflict, because they will inevitably arise.
One thing I'm quite big on is if you look at Wales has actually lost quite a lot of coaching IP overseas or to other home nations. We've got people like Steve Tandy with Scotland, Robin McBride with Leinster, Stephen Jones is with Moana Pacifica and Super Rugby. Obviously, I know you can't speak about individual cases, but will there be? And obviously, you've got Aled Walters with Ireland. Is there going to be a push in this strategy to bring some of these people back to Wales? It doesn't have to be with the national side, but with the regions as well, with a pathway. Is that going to be a focus as well?
So I think coaching development is going to be a huge focus and is already gaining increasing focus. It was one of the reasons we went to Matt to ask him to do the interim role, because we shouldn't be having the discussion that we've lost that IP. We should be saying, okay, a head coach needs to develop. Where are we going to? Where's their next step? If there isn't a step for them within their own club, can we look at it across the Welsh system? And if there isn't a step across the Welsh system, can we support them to go somewhere else to grow and develop, but then with the aim of bringing them back, and it's part of their development plan. And I think, as well as some of the other areas that I've said, I think we've neglected for quite a long time the fact that people have had to, or the coaches have had to feel they've had to go somewhere else to develop and grow and deliver their craft is I think really sad. Now, if they've done it and it's part of a development plan and part of a positive conversation, that's different. But I think we need to do better at wanting to retain coaches as much as wanting to retain and nurture players in Wales, and that's a really important part of our strategy.
Yeah, obviously, in terms of the last couple of months, I suppose for me anyway, the biggest positive is the under-20s victory against England. I think it was up to like 15 players in the squad. The whole Six Nations under-20 Six Nations squad are based in England. A lot of that is obviously educational opportunities that maybe we can't offer in Wales. But is that part of the strategy as well, to try and stop that player drain? Not maybe the top players, but at that sort of academy level.
No, it's a really good question. Actually, one of our board members messaged me last night and said, please, can you flag how much we're wanting to improve our offer to younger players from an education perspective? So we've got a project going on at the moment where we're looking at what we can do, whether that's around bursaries, better support, working more closely with our educational establishments. So we're really looking forward to seeing that come to fruition, because it is really important. And then I think then secondly, it's then, but if a player still chooses to go to England, how do we stay really close to them and keep them still wanting to play for Wales, especially with the changes to Regulation 8, etc. We've got to work really hard to retain them in Wales. So yes, that's going to be part of our strategy, and I'm really excited. And it's Chris James who's leading that piece of work for us, along with our team, and ex-teacher, hugely passionate about schools and education. So we definitely want to be able to improve the offer. And it's talking to some of the younger players. I was actually talking to a mum of a younger player. It's also not just the education, but it's everything that you provide and offer them. It's the support so they can balance their education with their rugby. It's, she was saying that he's having to put his own petrol in the car. He's having to pay for his own gym membership. He's having to, and if he didn't have supportive parents, it's a really hard thing to do. So what does that welfare package so that they feel supported, they feel valued, and they feel like we really want to look after them and keep them as part of the setup is really important.
Yeah.
Is the second part of that answer about how important it is if they do go to keep in touch with them? Is that the more important part? Because you probably financially we can't always compete, but I guess it's keeping them feeling valued, isn't it? And there's obviously this stuff coming in next month. I think the minimum wage is going up in England, which is affecting the academy deals. I think academy deals in England are going to be about 18 to 20,000 for 19 to 20-year-olds, which is considerably more than what's on offer here in Wales. So the challenge is probably only getting harder, isn't it?
It is, and so that's why I said it's twofold. Let's make sure we've got a intentional and really clearly articulated programme for how we can retain as many players. I think what hurts me, and it generally hurts me, is when we lose a player that we didn't need to lose, because we could have done something different to keep that player by having the right conversation at the right time and finding out what it was that they were leaving. So I think that's the first step. But then you're absolutely right, Ben, we're not going to be able to keep all the players. So it's how do we stay in touch with them? How do we support them? How do we keep having those conversations with them and making sure that that's done in a really intentional way? So it's both sides of that.
In terms of, so you've been in this role a while now. So I got two questions. I mean, how have you found the role? And one of the, I mean, every chief executive or chair gets criticism, but one of the criticisms that some people have leveled at you is that you maybe have outsourced some decisions, like we've done the Porter's review. So what would you say to that? Yeah. And will the findings be made public?
Yeah. So on the first one, how have I found it? It's the hardest thing I've ever done, and I choose a challenge. I don't choose a job. So did I expect it to be easy? No. Did I expect it to be this hard? No. Would I have still chosen to do it? Absolutely. But it is so hard. But it's hard because people care so much about rugby in Wales. So it's also what makes it brilliant and what makes it a privilege every day to keep doing it and to try, do my best to make a positive impact, but a positive impact that's a genuine legacy that will sustain us into the future, and that people will say, actually what we did then, we did the right stuff then, we did the hard stuff, and we're in a much better position now as a result of it. So, but it is so hard. I think it is, particularly because I'm a massive fan as well. So the hurt is really deep, and you feel, I'll be really honest, I feel like I've let everybody down, and that's really difficult. But you can choose to deal with that in two ways, can't you? You can either use that to fire your belly and make yourself even more determined to turn it around, or you can kind of let it hit you and get down about it. So I'm using it to fire a determination in me to improve and keep going. On the second one, I didn't outsource the review. I had some very, very brilliant analysts that had data that we didn't have all the access to, helping me produce a much more detailed and in-depth review. But I did it. I sat with them day in, day out, building the data, building the questions, understanding exactly what it is we were going to look at, right the way down to, what are the more qualitative things we're going to ask. So, I think it's the absolute right thing to do as a chief exec, to find the best sources of data you can when you're in the position you're in. And if anybody anybody else who runs a business, you would do that. So I didn't outsource the review. I got access to the best data in the world and the most in-depth data in the world to help inform the review that I led. And will it be made public? No, it won't be made public. I mean, Ben asked me and Steph asked me any questions about what it said, but we assured everybody that participated in it that it would be confidential. So from that perspective, but there was really interesting data in there that around things like volatility. I was talking about the volatility of teams and just seeing how much more volatile Wales is as a rugby nation over the last 30 years in comparison to others, and then looking at what points that volatility has happened and whether we can understand how we prevent that in the future. There's really interesting data on team cohesion, and I think we've had this conversation. So one of the single biggest factors on team success is how many minutes each player pair has played with each other. That's the single biggest factor determining whether a team is going to win. And so you imagine if you've got your number one, how many times they've played with number two, number three, number four, down to the minutes that they've played. And you take number two, there's 450 different pairings. And our team cohesion is one of the lowest in tier one at the moment. We know that because we've lost a lot of players. But actually seeing the stats and then seeing that actually if we keep growing with this squad, at what point will that cohesion index be up at the level of where we need it to be, and therefore how long is the recovery going to be, and what could we do in the short term to improve some of that cohesion with some of so it's that kind of data. But I'm really happy to go through that data. But the qualitative side of it, we promised everyone that we would do that confidentially. So and I think as a result we got some really honest and hard to read feedback.
I think it's a year now since you were last on the podcast. Obviously, that was at the end of last year's.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, at the end of last year's Six Nations. Looking back over that one, I think at the time, and you've probably said it since, you promised bold decisions in order to fix Welsh rugby. And obviously, Steph mentioned 4 or 3 teams at the head of the pod, and that is usually the go-to when it comes to bold decisions. Obviously, that's not on the cards. I just wanted to know, looking back over the last 12 months, what you felt were the bold decisions you've made. Obviously, given the 3 teams, 4 teams, that is not on the table.
So I think choosing to stay with 4 teams is a bold decision. It's the other side of the coin, isn't it? And choosing to, we have turned around the finances in Welsh Rugby Union in order to be able to fund that. And that is a bold decision. Some of the decisions we've taken to turn around those finances haven't been easy and haven't been straightforward. They don't hit the press for obvious reasons in the same way that performance of the national team does. But if I hadn't taken those decisions, then we would not have been able to fund the teams to the level that they need to. So it's the other side of the coin. But if I'd gone to and said 3 regions, there's been people saying you should have stuck with 4, and why didn't you make that bold decision? So I would say actually sticking with 4. But I'd also say that wasn't just my decision. That was a board decision, and one that we took in conjunction with the PRB as well. I think when you see some of the other announcements that we're going to be making as part of the strategy over the next few weeks, and it was one of the reasons, and you asked me really honestly why I haven't been speaking in the last few days, is actually I was really hoping to wait if Saturday's performance had been a better one until we could have told you about the director of rugby, the head coach, the chief growth officer, because the decisions we're taking there, big decisions, decision to restructure the executive team. We've gone from 9 direct reports to 5, and I'm bringing in some really new and fresh and innovative ideas. Not easy to do that, and there's going to be there'll be some more change coming as well. So yeah, you don't take bold decisions for no reason either, Ben, just to be seen to be making bold decisions. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, you mentioned the strategy there, and that there's more announcements to come, and obviously that's something that's come out over the course. Are you happy with the level of detail that is out there on the One Wales strategy? I suppose you're probably limited in a way by the PRA not being agreed, but are you happy with what is out there, the level of detail at the minute?
I think it's comparable to what all the other unions have out there, and I think because we published the strategy in July, but I said the one bit that hadn't been completed because it was the professional club pillar side of it, because we needed more. We needed to get the PRA over the line, so we'll be able to announce that soon. I think the more exciting bit is what we've done since to deliver it. So the work that we'll be announcing. We've been doing a consultation with our clubs on a new club investment model, because what the strategy says is we want to create thriving and sustainable community hubs that are at the heart of their towns and their villages. Actually, and we've got goals around that, about them being more inclusive, about more players playing, etc. How we actually deliver that is the really important bit, Ben. And there's and the consultation we've been doing on that. I've always said that strategy for me is 95% execution. We've published it, but it's actually the things you will now start to see that we've worked on that are going to really change our game for the future. The things I want people to care about and see the detail on. The detail behind that club investment model is huge. And, and it'll actually see us being able to increase the funding in clubs over the next 5 years, which I think is really good. But more importantly, support them to get more support and more funding from other sources too. And it's just, again, another, lots of thank yous, really. I said thank you to Matt, the players, to Jack, the captain, in terms of what they've done over the last campaign. But the way the clubs have been engaging with the team on consulting on the strategy has been fantastic. And I think as a result, where we're going with the new investment model is much better as a result of their input. So it's about the execution, Ben, and there will be more when we've been doing more work on the brand, so some of the things about how we're going to engage fans, etc. So each of those pillars, we haven't kind of been sat since June and we published it doing nothing. There's detail behind each of them, and one of the things we could think about, because I really appreciate. Realise it's a year, is actually really happy to come on, maybe bring a member of my team who's leading on one of those and go into a bit more detail on each, so that people can hear what we're doing in each of the areas.
Definitely. I'm wary of time, so I guess just quickly, you mentioned some of the upcoming appointments.
Yes.
Have you got timeframes on when each of those are likely to be announced or appointed?
So very shortly, but what you have to do is you get your preferred candidate. They've then got to go through a process with their own employer in terms of agreeing comms and notice periods. We can't determine or drive that. So I don't want to kind of give an exact date, but they're all three of those appointments are imminent. And so as soon as we've got the candidates and that they've been able to communicate it with their current employer, then we'll be looking to announce them.
So I guess with the coach specifically, you're confident then that Japan tour, there'll be a coach in place?
That will depend on their notice period. So we don't want to because we want a coach for the long term, we don't want to choose a coach that, because they're available immediately, it might mean that we look for an interim solution for the Japan tour if they've got a 6-month notice period, which some of them do have. So we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. I think getting the right person, even if it takes a little bit more time, is the right answer at this point.
Perfect.
But ideally, to have them in for the Japan tour would be great.
Yeah. I think that is just about everything. I think Steph has gone quiet, which is
always a good thing.
Never sure if that's a good sign or not. Obviously, I'm wary of time. Abi, thanks again for coming on the podcast and joining us.
No, thank you. And let's not leave it a year next time. I'm really happy to come back and talk about more detail behind what we're doing to deliver on the strategy and, ensure that we give an amazing rugby playing nation a whole rugby playing system that everybody deserves. That's my determination, and we're doing it at every stage to rebuild. So happy to come back and talk about that. But thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Brilliant. Hopefully you have too listening. If you have, make sure to subscribe, leave a review. Really does help us out. But until the next podcast, goodbye.